Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we're making one of our favorite recipes on the blog, Hyggeboller. While that name pretty much means cozy rolls, they're actually inspired by a recipe that Emma found in an old cookbook when she was in Denmark called Hyggeboller. The rolls have ham, cheese, and chives in them, which makes them super savory. Let's make these rolls. The first step to making the dough is combining milk and water in a microwave safe container. I like to use a glass measuring cup so I can also measure the amount of liquid at the same time. And the reason you want it to be microwave safe is because these are both fridge cold right now and we want them to be lukewarm in temperature so that the yeast will actually work. I'm starting with 100 milliliters of milk. And make sure to get down on eye level to the line to make sure it's an accurate measurement. Then I'm adding in 100 milliliters of water. This is 200 milliliters of liquid total. Now we're gonna microwave it until it gets to that lukewarm temperature. One way to check whether the liquid is at the right temperature is to take a clean hand and just stick one finger into the liquid, and if it feels warm to your body temperature, that means it's most likely at the right temperature. You can also check the package of yeast that you're using. They usually have temperatures on the back, and you can use a thermometer to confirm that temperature. I'm gonna be mixing the dough in a stand mixer today, but you can also do this in a large mixing bowl and knead by hand. I'm gonna add our liquid to the bowl of my stand mixer. Next, we're going to add our yeast. I like to use instant yeast, but you can also use active dry yeast, or if you can find it, you can use fresh yeast. For instant yeast, you can often just add this right to the bowl of the stand mixer without activating it like you would with active dry yeast. If you're ever in doubt, read the instructions on the package or container of yeast that you are using. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you how you can check if your yeast is alive. For this recipe, I'm adding 2 teaspoons of instant yeast. It's about the same amount of active dry, and I believe around 17 grams of fresh yeast. This recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of sugar, so I just have that measured out in a small bowl. I'm going to add a little bit of it to this bowl, and this will help bring the yeast to life. I don't need to add all of this right now, so I'm just going to set the remainder aside and add it to the dough when we're mixing it later. Now I'm taking a spoon and I'm going to stir together the sugar, yeast, milk, and water. Now we're letting this sit 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're gonna come back and check on it. And hopefully you'll be able to see bubbles on the surface and a little bit of frothing. And that's how you know that the yeast is working. Be back in 5 minutes. All right, it's been 5 minutes, so let's take a look. Hopefully you can see this well enough, but when the yeast is working, you should see this frothy layer on the top, and you can also see a few bubbles down here forming. So there's one there, there's some here, a few all throughout. If you leave it for even longer, you should see more bubbles. If you don't see any activity at all in the yeast, you can try to add a little bit more sugar and mix that in. If it's still not doing anything at all, your yeast may be expired, and so we would definitely recommend starting over with new yeast. Okay, let's continue making the dough. I'm gonna add in the rest of the sugar to the bowl with the liquid and yeast. I have 2 tablespoons of melted butter. It's cooled down so it's not super hot when it goes into this, because that can affect the yeast. Before I add anything else, I'm gonna set up my stand mixer. And I'm using the dough hook attachment. Next, I'm adding in 400 grams of all-purpose or bread flour. A whole bunch of things can affect how sticky your dough is, including the weather that day, where you live, the altitude, a whole bunch of factors. So keeping a little bit of the flour out of the dough to start can help just for that. Last thing I'm adding to start kneading is 1 teaspoon of salt. On this KitchenAid, I keep it between 2 and a 3. If you do see the dough sticking to the sides of the bowl, or if it's really sticky and sticking to your hands when you touch it, I would add more flour until it does not do that. I'm gonna keep kneading this. It's probably going to go for around 10 minutes. And if you're doing this by hand, it's around the same amount of time. While the dough kneads is a great time to prepare the fillings for these Hyggeboller. We're adding ham, cheese of your choice. I like to use sharp white cheddar. And I have a bunch of chives that I washed and dried on this paper towel. I'm gonna chop about 2 tablespoons worth of chives. Okay, it's maybe a little bit more than that, but I like chives. Next, we're dicing 75 grams of ham. Ideally, this would be like thick pieces of ham, but this is all I could find. It's just slices of Black Forest uncured ham. I'm actually gonna weigh out the slices so I know how much to cut. Now we're grating 80 grams of cheese. All right, let's check how much we got. Cheese mountain. All right, my dough is done kneading. The dough is really smooth and elastic. And you know that the dough is done kneading when you can take a piece of it like this and stretch it out between your fingers. You should be able to see light coming through, and it shouldn't be breaking easily. And this is called the window pane test. We're not quite done with the mixer yet. We're gonna leave the dough in there, and now it's time to add our toppings. We're adding them here at the end because we don't want them to get too broken up by the mixer. We just want them well incorporated. Most of it is incorporated. We're just gonna give it a few mixes by hand to make sure it's evenly distributed. Covering the dough in some plastic wrap, and then I'm gonna set it aside and let it rise for around 45 minutes. All right, see you in 45. Our dough has risen, now we're gonna shape the rolls. I have a baking sheet lined with a silicone mat. You can also use parchment paper. And then I like to divide dough using a bench scraper. You can also use a knife or just use your hands. Look at how much that's risen. It's nice and airy. I like to just shape it into a log before I start dividing the dough. I'm going to divide this into 12 equal-sized pieces. And I always like to just divide it in half to start, and then into quarters. And then with each of these, I'm gonna roll it out a little bit, just into more of a log shape. And then these are getting divided into thirds. Now, if there are any that feel smaller than the rest, you can take some of the larger ones and just add a little bit of dough to the ones that seem a little bit small. Now that these are all divided, we're gonna take each piece of dough and then roll it in our hands to make it a little bit more of a ball shape. On an unfloured surface, so I'm just using my counter, I'm going to take the ball and roll it around on the surface of the table, kind of cupping it in your palm and rolling it and letting your hands kind of stretch the dough at the edges. And this is going to create tension on the surface of the dough. That's how you're left with really round, perfect rolls. And repeat. We have 12 rolls shaped. Now it's time to cover them, and they're going to rise for their second rise another 30 to 40 minutes. I'm gonna use the plastic wrap from before. All right, see you in 30 to 40 minutes. With about 10 minutes left in the rising time, we're going to preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. The rolls are done rising, so now we're gonna remove the plastic wrap. You can tell that the rolls are done rising when you press the dough, and it should make an indent that stays there for a little bit. It shouldn't be tough to press in, and it shouldn't spring back right away. It should be really nice and airy. I have a little bit of milk in here, and we're going to brush the rolls with the milk before baking. These are going in the oven for around 15 minutes. All right, we're gonna transfer the rolls to our cooling rack to fully cool down. Let's try it. You can taste the ham and the chives, and the cheese is just that extra savory element. Really good. And they're so soft. Even though the buns that I made this time, they're a tiny bit overproofed, they're still amazing, so don't be discouraged. Thank you for watching our video. We hope you try this recipe. Let us know in the comments if you do. And we'll see you for the next video. Bye. You can use a thermometer, and you can use a thermometer to check. And you can use a I can't say.